This video will describe how to create a custom hatch pattern for AutoCAD. Let's begin with some hatch pattern basics. I will begin by opening up the file that describes all of the hatch patterns that come with AutoCAD. You'll notice that it's got some information at the top and some instructions to the user, and then it's followed by the hatch patterns down below. Hatch patterns consist of line patterns that are repeated at specified offsets. A hatch pattern is much like a line type file. Many of the concepts are the same. Hatch patterns are comma delineated, meaning that each element of a hatch pattern is separated by commas. Unlike macros, spaces are ignored in hatch patterns. Blank lines and text to the right of a semicolon are ignored. A custom hatch pattern has the following structure: a header line and one or more lines of code to define the pattern. The header line begins with an asterisk and is followed by the name and an optional description. Each line of code has the following descriptors and the following format: the angle, the X and Y origin, the change in X and Y, and then the line pattern. Let's consider the definition for the dash hatch pattern. I'll scroll down here until I find it, and then I'll highlight it. And here it is right here. This is the dash hatch pattern that comes with AutoCAD. You'll notice that it begins with an asterisk here at the beginning. That indicates to AutoCAD that this is a new hash pattern, and then the name of the pattern itself. AutoCAD always puts the name of the pattern in all capital letters. It's not required, but it's just one of their formats. Followed by a comma, telling the computer program now that this is the description. The description can be numbers and letters and have up to 80 characters. The following line is the description of it by itself. So the first 0 there tells the computer that this line will be drawn at an angle of 0 or out to the right or to the east, followed by a comma. Again, the space here is just to chunk the information so that it makes it easier to read. It doesn't have any effect on how the program works. The next two numbers are 0, 0, telling the computer that the first line will be drawn through that point, 0, 0. The next two numbers here are the change in X and the change in Y. So every time the pattern repeats, it's going to shift to the right 1/8 of an inch, and then it's going to be offset in the Y direction 1/8 of an inch as well. Remember that these numbers are at this angle. So on the original one, it'll be out to the right. But if you look at something like the Dolomite down here, this number is 45. So your change in X and Y here and here are going to be at an angle of 45 degrees. We'll get more to that later. The following two numbers on the dash are the line pattern. So it'll make an 1/8 of an inch dash followed by an 1/8 of an inch space. So now let's take a look at how this actually works as we create our own hatch pattern. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the environment by turning off the icon. So UCS icon. I'm going to just turn it off for now so that it's not in our way. And then I'm going to place a donut at 0, 0. I'll give it a 0 interior diameter and a 0.03 outside diameter, and I'll put it at 0, 0 so that we can just see where it is for the purposes of creating new hatch patterns. And then of course every hatch pattern has to have a closed profile, so I'll just create a circle. Now let's go back to the dash hatch pattern. If I want to put the dash hatch pattern in here, I'll just come in and say select my area that I want to hatch, and then I'll come down here and find the dash hatch pattern and apply it. Notice here that here is 0, 0 signified by the donut, and my first line goes at an angle of 0. Okay, it goes through 0, 0 beginning there. It has an offset of an 1/8 of an inch in the X and an 1/8 of an inch in the Y. So this would be the second line that it would draw, and this point right here would be the place where it begins. And then the line pattern is 1/8 of an inch down, then 1/8 of an inch up, 1/8 of an inch down, then 1/8 of an inch up, and so on. Now to create my own, I have to do a couple of things. The first thing I have to do is I have to tell the computer where to find the hatch patterns. Hatch patterns don't have to be loaded like line type patterns. They simply need to be, you simply need to tell the computer where to find them. So if I go to my Options dialog box, on the first tab for Files, under File Support Path, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a search path here. I'm going to say Add, and then I'll just browse and point it to my desktop so that when I create a new hatch pattern, if I put it on my desktop, it will automatically be loaded by AutoCAD. Now to create this new hatch pattern, I'm simply going to use Notepad again, and I'm going to use the same format. So I'm going to call this new pattern Test 1. So it starts with an asterisk, and then it's called Test 1. Remember, AutoCAD makes the name of the file in all capitals, so to maintain their same format, I'm going to do the same, followed by a description, which is just a test hatch pattern. This description is completely optional. You don't have to put it in. I'm going to follow this up with the actual pattern for the hatch itself, beginning with the angle of 0, comma. So this pattern is going to go straight out to the right at an angle of 0. I want the first line to go through 0, 0, so I'll just type in 0, comma, 0, comma. That means that my pattern is going to start there. And then I'm going to give it an X offset of 1/4 of an inch, 0.25, and a Y offset of 1/2 of an inch, 0.5, comma. And then my line pattern, it's going to have a 1 inch down pin segment followed by a 1/4 of an inch up pin segment. The final thing you have to remember is that hatch patterns must have another empty line down here so that it has enter. So I just press enter one time, and now I can save this. So I'll say save as. I'm going to save it on my desktop, and then we don't want it as a text file, so I'll choose all files here, and I will call it test1.pat. That's how AutoCAD knows that it's a pattern file. It's got that PAT. One important thing to note is that this name right here must match this name right here. Again, the capital letters part don't matter, but if the name is different here than it is here, it won't find it. So I'll choose save, and now it's been saved to my desktop. And now if I want to test that out, I can simply test my hatch pattern by picking it here, scrolling to the very end, and you'll see here that I've got test 1, and there it is. So notice here that I've got a dash that is 1 inch long with a quarter of an inch space, and that's my pattern. So again, it's a 0 pattern. The angle is 0. It begins at 0, 0. Okay. The X offset is 1/4 of an inch. The Y offset is 1/2 of an inch. And then the line pattern is 1 inch down with 1/4 of an inch up, and it repeats. Now if I go back to that same pattern, we can start off by just changing a couple things. If I come in and I change the angle now to say 30 degrees, I can just say 30 there and then save that. So as soon as I choose save here, now I come back here, all I have to do is just make it think about that a little bit, so I'll click on and off. You notice now that my angle is at 30 degrees. So again, the angle's at 30 degrees, okay? It starts at 0, 0. The X offset now goes at that 30 degree angle, so it's 1/4 of an inch in the X at the 30 degree angle, and 1/2 of an inch at the Y, so it's perpendicular. So it's the X offset is at the 30 degree angle, the Y offset is perpendicular to that, and then we have our line pattern. I'll go back in and I'll modify this again. We'll change this back to 0 just to keep it easy, This time I'm going to change the origin. I could say let's start at 0.25 instead of 0. Okay, so I'll just make that simple change there. My start point will be an absolute coordinate of 0.25 comma 0. So I'll save this. When I come back in here and just make it think about this a little bit, notice now that my start point is here. Okay, so the angle is still 0. Okay, it's back to 0 now. The origin, however, is not 0, 0 where the donut is, but it's a quarter of an inch over, 0.250. And then everything else is the same. The x offset is a quarter of an inch, the y offset's a half of an inch, and then the line pattern is 1 inch down and a quarter of an inch up. The last thing that we'll look at before we conclude this part of the video is we will go back now and we will change our x and y offsets. So right now my x offset is a quarter of an inch and my y offset is a half of an inch. I'm going to change the x offset to a half of an inch, and I'll make the y offset a quarter of an inch, just to switch those around a little bit and give you the idea here of what's going on. Again, I'll save this, and then I come back to AutoCAD. I can simply reload this one more time. So now notice how it's different. Again, a lot of things are the same. So my origin has the pattern has an angle of 0. 0, 0 is the beginning of it. Okay, but now my x offset from the start of this line to the start of the next line is a half of an inch in the x and a quarter of an inch in the y. Okay, a half of an inch in the x and then a quarter of an inch in the y. And then again, just to reiterate, if I wanted to show that that angle is the thing that matters, I'll change this back to 30 and I'll save it here. So now when I reload this one more time, again, here we are. Notice that my angle now is 30. The origin of that pattern is 0, 0. It goes at, my pattern repeats a half of an inch in the x. Remember, x is now at that 30-degree angle, a quarter of an inch in the y, and then my line pattern is 1 inch down and a quarter of an inch up. So this concludes part 1 of the video. We'll go through another part here in a few minutes, and we will look at how to make additional lines in our pattern.